right, everyone, welcome. We'd like to call to order the City of Santa Barbara Harbor Commission regular meeting of February 16th, 2023. Can we have roll call, please, Angela?
Commissioner Anderson?
Here.
Commissioner Cohen?
Here.
Commissioner Hanrahan?
Here.
Commissioner McCray?
Here.
Commissioner Nelson?
Here.
Commissioner Stanowick?
Here.
Chair Stedman?
Here.
Thank you.
All right, are there any? Are there any changes to the agenda?
Chair Stedman, no changes tonight.
Excellent. Any general public comment, Angela?
I haven't received any speaker slips, but give me a moment to check online. And also remind anyone who is online, if they would like to speak, they can indicate that by raising their hand in the Zoom platform. And still see no hands.
Okay. Let's go to subcommittee reports.
Great. Thanks, Chair Stedman. For subcommittee reports, there was no subcommittees that met over the last month, but we did have a special meeting of the Harbor Commission on January 24th, and thank you to the Waterfront for putting that together for us. For me, in my opinion, I thought it was very positive. We all had the chance to go ahead and ask questions together and just really enhance, I think, the role of the Commission. In terms of efficiency, I think we can move a lot of the administrative tasks to the consent calendar and also allow more discretion for the department updates kind of going forward at really depending on what's going on in their respective area. In terms of effectiveness, I thought the commission, at least the feedback from the commission is that I think we all kind of wanted to be more involved in new business. And I think that is a great idea, really, in terms of the experience of everybody on the commission, in terms of fishing, real estate, restaurant business, and I just thought the diversity of knowledge that we have really will go ahead and benefit everybody, including the public. I think also, too, in terms of these items, we're not really going and omitting them going forward, but it's really just a reallocation of time and resources on how we are dealing with some of these items going forward. Also, an immediate action item I thought that was really good from this is that in the next agenda item, the consent calendar, there is going to be some of the things there that would have previously been discussed and a presentation on, and they are part of the consent calendar, so we can still ask questions on them, and we could still move those two items of discussion, but I think that it's better suited to keep them here where, once again, just enhancing the efficiency of the whole meeting. So for me, I'm excited for the new changes, but I know that it's part of the director's report. Director Wiltshire is going to be touching on this as well, so I won't go any further with that, but I thought it was a great meeting that we had on the 24th for the special harbor meeting. However, the subcommittee report, I think Commissioner Hanrahan would like to speak regarding the cruise ship subcommittee that's coming up in the next few days.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Yes, just to announce Wednesday, February 22nd, reminding the Council that we will be having a cruise ship subcommittee meeting in the Waterfront classroom. Once again, that's Wednesday, February 22nd at 12 o'clock in the Waterfront classroom. The main focus of this meeting will be to focus on waste management and discharge practices. Certainly an aspect of the public concern that has been brought up time and again. So thanks very much to Waterfront staff for scheduling presentations from the Waterfront staff. We'll be hearing a bit more about that visit. It was a site visit to one of the ships recently. It'll be exciting to hear about what was learned. We'll also be hearing from Cruise Lines International Association, an industry group, as well as the U.S. Coast Guard, focusing on, again, waste management and discharge practices. That is Wednesday, February 22nd at 12 o'clock. Thank you.
Great. I think we'll move on to the consent calendar.
Okay, there are no other subcommittee?
I don't believe any other subcommittee has met or has one upcoming. So I think we're all set.
Okay, very well. Just like the Vice Chair mentioned, we're moving to a more streamlined format and agenda, so we'll move right to the consent calendar. Angela, would you like to just read the items, please?
Item number 1, approval of the minutes. Item number 2, proposed assignment of lease agreement number 27073, Anchor Rose Lounge, located downstairs at 113 Harbor Way. And item number 3, proposed assignment of lease agreement number 23328, Anchor Rose Restaurant, located upstairs at 113 Harbor Way.
Okay, is there a motion to approve the items on the consent calendar?
Chair
I move-
Stedman, we might just want to check if there's public comment. This would be the time
Oh,
for
good
public,
call.
just to see if there's public comment on the entire consent
Sure,
calendar.
good call.
I don't see any hands raised online, and I also don't have any speaker slips for these items, but we do have speakers for upcoming items.
Very well.
I move that we approve the items on the consent calendar and forward them to City Council.
Second?
Angela?
Commissioner Anderson?
Yes.
Commissioner Cohen?
Yes.
Commissioner Hanrahan?
Yes.
Commissioner McCray?
Yes.
Commissioner Nelson?
Yes.
Commissioner Stanowick?
Yes.
Chair Stedman?
Yes.
That's unanimous. Thank you.
All right, moving right along briskly here to new business. Item number 4. Can you read that, please, Angela?
Item number 4, Harbor Commission Subcommittee Assignments Update. Recommendation that Harbor Commission receive a presentation from staff on the city's preferred approach to boards and commission committees and take action as necessary to reorganize and/or dissolve existing subcommittees, establish any applicable ad hoc work groups, and reassign commissioner roles.
Very well. So, Director Wiltshire, you have a presentation, correct?
Yeah, Chair Stedman, Harbor Commissioners, brief presentation today on subcommittees. This is typically where we would just sort of shuffle around subcommittee members, but staff has some recommendations on kind of changing the way we manage subcommittees. This was something that came from the priority workshop and also a larger city effort that's going on. Next slide. So in short, staff recommends that we move away from standing subcommittees and move towards ad hoc work groups. So there's really a couple drivers behind this change. So first and foremost, there's the broader citywide effort to reduce or limit the number of subcommittees and standing subcommittees. Realistically, Harbor Commission's kind of unique. We have more standing subcommittees than any other board and commission. We have more standing subcommittees than council itself. And so we're in kind of a unique spot where we've created all of these subcommittees. Some of the concerns that have been raised with subcommittees are they are time-consuming for staff and city resources, and so that's something that's really being kind of scrutinized on a city level. From the Harbor Commission side of view, they sometimes have limited effectiveness. They're really bound by a lot of constraints, the Brown Act mainly, and requiring staff to kind of stand up an entire meeting. That's almost the equivalent of a full Harbor Commission meeting just for these subcommittees. And they're really not decision-making bodies, so they're a subset of Harbor Commission, so the intent of them is really to report back to the full Harbor Commission anyway. So there can't be any actions or motions or actions being taken at the subcommittee level. They're really kind of intended as fact-finding or informational endeavors. Next slide. So with all that in mind, staff's recommending to move towards ad hoc work groups. The differences there being ad hoc work groups can be made up of 3 or less Harbor Commissioners, which is the same practice we've been having for subcommittees. They can meet with staff independently, or they can involve staff. They can kind of work a little more autonomously on their own. Ad hoc work groups are not bound by Brown Act rules or regulations. And they're still required to report back to full Harbor Commission. And the real catch is that they need to be formed with a specific task in mind, sort of a clear task and a clear end date. And so they can be a little more nimble and created more on the fly to sort of handle information gathering outside of the full Harbor Commission and then report back to the Harbor Commission. So really a big takeaway is when forming these ad hoc groups, the Harbor Commission really needs to ask what is the task of the work group and what is kind of a clear end goal of that work group. And so that can be, a work group can be kind of sent out to gather information, meet with folks, meet with people in the public, meet with staff, and being more nimble in that sense and report that information back to the Harbor Commission for a decision. Next slide. So as of now, this is our current makeup of standing subcommittees. Staff's recommendation at this stage is dissolving all standing subcommittees except for the cruise ship subcommittee. The only reason there is because the cruise ship subcommittee is currently kind of halfway through what they are doing. They're meeting very, very publicly. It may be best to just let that subcommittee kind of finish and resolve on its own, as opposed to kind of changing the dynamic. I wouldn't want to make it seem like we're misleading the public or changing something while it's so midstream. Whereas the other subcommittees would be really kind of well handled with ad hoc work groups. So I think we have a real opportunity, again, kind of with efficiency in mind, and it's just sort of a cleaner and better way of handling business to move forward with that. Next slide. And again, this would be just a recommendation from staff from how this could sort of look. And so cruise ship subcommittee, again, we'd recommend that it sort of stay put and run its course of business. Some of the other major ones that we have been meeting recently are the budget subcommittee. That could very easily be turned into a budget ad hoc work group, and that could be something that could be handled annually. Typically, the budget subcommittee gets involved during the budget phase, and they do sort of a pre-review with staff, take a little bit of a deeper dive, and report back to the full Harbor Commission. So that's very much something that could still happen with the creation of a budget ad hoc work group. And similar for the commercial fishing work group. They're doing a lot of different tasks, but we could kind of point that committee at more specific tasks, and they'd sort of have the autonomy to work with those different groups more flexibly. They could work with staff more flexibly, work amongst themselves more flexibly. So I think even that group would suit itself very well to an ad hoc work group. And then I just listed kind of other work groups as needed. So as we dive into policy efforts, larger work efforts, this can sort of be a nimble tool to have 3 or fewer harbor commissioners go off and information gather and report back to the Harbor Commission. With that ends my presentation. I did see Assistant City Attorney John Doimus just step in, so if I know you missed the first bit of that, John, but I know you have a lot of involvement with sort of the larger city effort on reducing the number of subcommittees and kind of the legality behind it, and if you want to add anything, feel free to do so.
Sure, I will. Just really briefly, thank you, Mike. Good evening, Commission. One of the viewpoints, aside from just the resource load in terms of when you're staffing a Brown Act committee versus an ad hoc, where you're having to have staff time, everything else, recording in minutes and everything else, and the challenges of the Brown Act versus a work group, they can kind of get to the nitty-gritty of stuff, less formal. Also is the issue of, if you look at it, you look at all the majority of and here's the legal issue that our office has debated. That's a very good point. You look at all the commissions we have up and down the city, they're advisory. So they are to sit there and to advise city council on their jurisdiction. So for harbor matters involving the harbor, for Fire and Police Commission matters involving the Fire and Police Department. So the legality issue is, if you have an advisory committee, if you have advisory boards to city council, how can those advisory boards within themselves have subcommittees, right? Because it's like you're asking you're asking an advisory commission to create a advisory subcommittee. So it's kind of like a box within a box. So that's the legal issue, that when you have an advisory board that's just forming to provide advice, they really shouldn't be having subcommittees. They should be having working groups to provide to the larger committee, and in turn then provide that advice to council. So that's the legal side of why we would do this as well. I'm happy for any questions on that.
Oh, yes, I have a question. Yes, thank you, Mr. Doimus. I'm looking at the routine and required agenda items for the Harbor Commission, and one of them says committee assignments. Does that, I guess, have any bearing on the work group concept, or us mandating commissions or anything?
It's a very good question. No, you have the flexibility on that. So as you would form a work group, you would form the work group, you would form the subject matter of that work group, and you could have 3 or less commissions assigned to have that work group. And each member of that work group does not need a title. It's just 3 members just go about and here's your issue that you're going to be looking at and providing back to the commission at whole. And they're really, there should be in short duration, meaning like it shouldn't extend beyond years, but sometimes the work group may need to go a year, depending on whatever the, my preference is like year and a half or less is probably preferable for work groups. You don't want to extend it beyond that.
Great, thank you.
Commissioner Nelson, before you ask your question, may I ask just a quick one? So my question might be similar to the vice chair's, but when we constitute a work group or ad hoc group, whatever you want to title it, does that, the subject matter and the members, does that have to be recorded?
In terms of the meetings?
No, just in terms of the establishment of that
Yes,
group.
yes. So it would have to be something agendized, brought forth in this committee, a discussion about it, the appointments of it, and everything else. And once that's done, they're off and running. They can set their meeting schedules, everything else, and then pick a date when they want to report back. And it could be depending, let's say it's an item that may take a year to do the work, a little bit over. The work group may want to give quarterly updates or whatever they so choose. So there's a lot of flexibility in line with that. And again, it gives greater access, greater ability to maneuver. You're not really sitting there worrying about an agenda. You're just trying to, when you're meeting, you're trying to get the work done, doing outreach, all that you need to do, right? So,
Great.
just the establishment, yeah, should be done here.
Okay. Thanks, Attorney Domas. Commissioner Nelson?
John, I'm curious. I'm a big Googler. And so I found a sort of guidelines on council advisory committees that was done in 2013 or 14. Is that still the?
The most, Commissioner Nelson, yeah, I believe the most recent update is, I would want to say 2-3 years old that I can recall. One is being worked on as we speak, so that one from 13-14, yes, is a little bit outdated.
Because it basically defined our universe as council advisory committees, not advisory committees to departments, but council advisory.
And that part is accurate. I would
And
definitely say that.
that's what we need. I think we need to realize is that the reason we sit here tonight is to provide advice to the council.
And that part has not changed. Yep,
Okay,
you are.
that's
You're
good.
absolutely council advisory committees.
And secondarily, one of the committees that I chair is the commercial fishing work group or the subcommittee. And that was created at a request by the city council. And so there was when we asked for guidance, they gave us back more than we asked for.
Sure.
We were essentially asking, should we look at properties that need to be acquired that are very expensive? And they came back and basically said to us that we want you to look at the local seafood industry as a way of diversifying our economy. So they broadened the scope of it. So while I can see, for example, an acquisition project be a discrete task for 6 months to 18 months very easily, but I can also see the other aspects of their charge to us or their guidance to us that will require us to convene a commercial fishing work group in 2024. And I want you to say, because you mentioned this to me before, and my understanding is there's no problem with us focusing on commercial fishing every year and establishing a work group or establishing a new work group to look at another commercial fishing issue.
There's no, in fact, that would be the, Commissioner Nelson, that'd probably be the most optimum way to do it, right? Versus having a subcommittee that's always kind of rolling over and over as years go by. Having a work group each year and with, maybe even focusing within a particular aspect, like you say, of commercial fishing industry, it keeps it fresh, it keeps it on point. There's some finality of it too, right? When you come with a recommendation, and then you can move on to the next subject matter within that, right? And you create a new work group, right? And that's the key too, is, I think the best word, I think that's what the city's trying to do. In terms of making progress, we're looking for finality, because then we're able to go the next step and the next step. And, having these lag on, there's no sense of finality, and it just keeps going on and on and on. So that's where work groups help, because when you're done with it, there's a recommendation, you move on to another subject matter.
And thank you very much. I just wanted to get that on the record, because that's kind of important to some of the committees that I'm currently chair for or a member of. And to you, Director Wiltshire, the word dissolve makes me a little nervous. Now, if you said transition or move to, then I get more comfortable, because the existing standing subcommittees have a lot of unfinished work. And I would hate to think that we're just decided that we're going to dissolve and abandon what we were working on. And so to me, for example, John, you and I are the only members of the SLIP Policy Assignment Committee. And there's one task that's been languishing for about a year and a half now, which is a methodology of how to establish market value of SLIP transfers. And to me, that while that lends itself to a work group to finish it up, when we tried to move from a standing, I made the recommendation earlier when we were filling seats here, that we go from a standing committee to an ad hoc committee. There was pushback from the council that we didn't want to do that. I mean, I want to do it, but now I'm worried because it's not here. So what happens to the effort that we have invested in that committee, the many people that attended? We met for over a year, and they still know, they're still out there, and I hate to do a disservice to them and just dissolve our focus on SLIP policy assignments. And so I'm hoping that it can be a work group.
Sure.
So could we start with the notion of, let's transition from standing committees to ad hoc committees, and in the process of that transition, we weed out the ones that, can go, but acknowledge the ones that need to stay?
I think procedurally, the best way to go about it, I understand exactly what you're saying. So procedurally, Commissioner Nelson, the best way to go about it in the most transparent way for the public, and the best from the organizational standpoint, would be to, obviously put, maybe as we're going through this, put one or two of these subcommittees on an agenda. And while you're simultaneously dissolving it, you're at the same meeting, and it can be agendized that way, creating the work group. And so that way, you know exactly that the work will be done, how it's exactly being transitioned. And there's nothing stopping from all the work that was done in the subcommittee being transferred over into that where you don't have to start over again.
So could our decisions be, I guess what I'm trying to say is conditional? I mean, I am a proponent and would like to vote for moving to ad hoc committees. But at the same time, there's been no discussion, no give and take between the waterfront department staff and the committee membership about what that task will be.
That's exactly what you would
And
agendize.
so
and
we could
discuss.
do a conditional approval to move to that, but I would hope there could be some discussions between staff and the membership of the committees to refine that scope of work for the first year or the first 18 months.
So, yes,
About
to answer your question, I would caution against using the word conditional, because you end up in no man's land.
Okay.
What I would say, what you would do is you would have a robust discussion when you're talking about taking one subcommittee, dissolving it, and establishing the scope of the work or works that you plan on doing it, and having that interaction. So all it may entail is just a longer meeting to net that out, to document all that, to create the record, and then go from there. Because the worst thing you want to do is conditional, because you know, like, okay, where are we? Like I said, like, we're in that no man's land. Are we still in subcommittee land? Are we still in ad hoc? Just as we're doing that process, when and Mike has a fine word in terms of we're dissolving one, we're actually creating the scope of work and the ad hocs. And maybe if you're taking one subcommittee, maybe based on the work that needs to be done to the issues, maybe 3 work groups spring out of it. And so be it, whatever that may be, whatever that discussion leads.
Where does that no man's land, where's that purgatory in the middle? What happens during that? Does that have to be a public meeting? So for example,
That's exactly right.
staff sees these committees far different than I do. And so there's got to be some give and take in terms of what that work thing will be. Now, does that gonna, I mean, for example, at the last meeting, I asked for a meeting of the Commercial Fisheries Subcommittee be scheduled. That was a month ago, and it's not been scheduled. So I worry if we get into the same sort of trap I approve or vote to approve dissolving the Commercial Fisheries Work Group or Standing Committee, but it's a month before we're actually talking about what the scope is going to be.
Sure, so you want to do that, I advise, you want to do that in the same meeting, right? So you don't want to separate, you dissolve one and create a work group. The power to create the work group lies in the commission, not staff, so you're going to be choosing what you vote on and how you create the work group and what the subject. Obviously, I highly recommend getting staff's input in terms of focusing on that, but it would all be done in a kind of a one-stop shop. It would be one meeting where you're picking to dissolve a committee and creating a work group that springs out of that work.
Okay, and just finally, though, I mean, so I'm not sure that we're ready to negotiate the work program for 5 standing subcommittees tonight.
No, well, it's not, I don't think it's in our agenda, number one.
So where do we go from here?
I think staff will work with creating, and the chair, creating an agenda for that. And it may not be, it may have to be parceled and depending on the work, two separate meetings to get it done, but we would have to agendize the process where we're eliminating a subcommittee and allowing in the agenda the creation of a work group from the work that needs to be done from that.
Okay.
And
Should we-
Commissioner
ahead.
Nelson, Chair Stebbin, my hope was that we wrote tonight's agenda to allow for that freedom if you would like, but there's nothing saying that it's forcing you. The intent was here, there are some of our standing subcommittees who haven't met in 6 months, 8 months, a year. And so the idea with those is that they could be set aside and ad hoc work groups could be created as needed. And so you don't have to do it all now, but if next meeting we're talking about some new policy effort or something that came out of the prioritization workshop, at that time you could create the work group. You wouldn't have to do it now. And so the only reason I put these up here is because these are pertinent work that's occurring right now. The example of the slip assignment committee, sure. And I had spoken with Chair Stedman about this. The original task of the slip assignment subcommittee didn't involve the remaining task that you're talking about. So that would suit itself perfectly for a work group.
I agree.
That doesn't have to happen now. We could agendize a month from now, 2 months from now, slip assignment work, and at that time a work group could go forth, or you could create it now if that's something that the Harbor Commission wanted to take on.
Well, okay, fair enough. I
So-
don't want to take up, I appreciate your indulging me in this time. I agree, and I don't disagree with you, so.
No, absolutely. Commissioner Cohen?
Thanks. I have a couple questions. One is just, and I'm not sure who I should direct this to, Director Wilshire. I'll just ask it. So does the city currently have guidelines for how these work groups are to work? And how, I mean, are they sending, are they recommending that an agenda be publicized and that we invite the public to these meetings? Or are these going to be, I mean, is there some sort of procedure list that we could use as a guideline? That's my first question.
Commissioner Cohen, yes and no. The intent of the ad hoc work group is it's not bound by the Brown Act, so it gives it more flexibility. you can complete work tasks. The place for public meeting and agendizing and all that is here at Harbor Commission. So the idea is that these groups can go off and gather that information. And if we have anything that is worthy of all of this public input, then we can gather it here in front of all 7 Harbor Commissioners, and that's where those decisions and that sort of work happens, being informed by the ad hoc work groups. We're a little ahead of the curve, so the city is kind of spearheading this effort now to put together guidelines on how we're hoping this will work, these efficiency changes, and so we're bringing it to the Harbor Commission kind of ahead of the game a little bit, but I just wanted to make sure that, knowing that we had our priority workshop and now we're dealing with our subcommittees, I wanted to make sure that this was out there, but that sort of guidance is forthcoming. But in short, no, the intent is not necessarily for these work groups to be full public meetings.
I mean, so I'll have a conversation on that, just because I see, having been to enough of these meetings, that it's a good place for the public usually to voice their concerns on issues that they feel passionately about. And I feel like inviting that sort of interaction into the full Harbor Commission meetings, there's a lot of business to do here. I don't know if that's going to be the most productive way for the public to always interact. So that's just a concern, but I understand that probably could be addressed by having public forum at these meetings if we chose to. I don't know what the guidelines are, so I can't really say to that. And then I just wanted to also, well, there's a couple things. I want to point out that there is, when we say transition, we are talking about transitioning committees, but we also are talking about dissolving some committees that I think, maybe we want to have a bigger conversation about. And then, since this is really the first time that we've had, as commissioners, a chance to talk about this openly outside of a few comments at the at the priorities meeting, I'm wondering if this is exactly the type of situation that calls for a work group or an ad hoc committee to be formed in order for a few of us to get together and discuss how we would want to transition, which committees we would want to transition, and if that would even be a possibility for us. Thank you.
Response, or?
No, Commissioner Cohen, to your first point, we can look into guidelines and how that would be structured. Assistant City Attorney Doimus might have some input on the legality of sort of that's box in a box type thing. So if we're standing up these public meetings with public comment and decision-making authority at a subcommittee level, I don't have an answer on that specifically, but we can, as staff, can kind of dig into that and look how those guidelines would come about.
Yes, thanks, Mike. As Director Wilshire said, the city's working on guidelines, and once they're provided, I'd be happy to do a presentation on that to you and for the commission. And they are public can attend. They can be advertised, all that. It's just decisions can't be made at that meeting. They're information gathering purposes, right? So there aren't decisions that are made, and so that's the biggest thing that's going on there. And it's basically information gathering to provide to the commission later. So you can advertise to the public to attend, have that interaction. That's perfectly appropriate for ad hoc committees, and more guidance will come, because that's how you do your work, right? Through interaction too, studying, having different groups come and meet, and it could be bringing everyone in, or a particular issue, bring one side in and meet with another side and all that. So that's up to the ad hoc committee's decision, how they want to go about doing their work. As far as, the decision to, when we're having the decision to, dissolve subcommittees and to, to create and create subcommittees, workshops and dissolve subcommittees, that's probably best left, here in the dais for the entire commission to have that. That's how I would recommend for the commission to have its discussion in general about it. So that's how I go about that.
Well, that just kind of goes back to when you're saying that the committees would need to decide how they wanted to operate, or how we would want to. It seems like this would be the perfect opportunity for us to have an ad hoc or a work group to decide how we want to manage that transition.
I totally understand, Commissioner Coe, but the reason why I would advise against is because you would be having, there'd only be three of you, and only three of you having discussion, which is collectively a board commission decision. What do we want to do? So this is an issue that goes out to the public. This is an internal administrative issue. And so what I'm saying is an administrative issue like this, in terms of how the commission wants to go about that, should be done with the entire commission debating it at a commission meeting. You know, when you're dealing with commercial fishermen, for example, that's a different issue that you reach out to, for example, the commercial fishing industry, the players that are in it, getting impact, getting input, getting all that. This is separate because it's the decision of the entire commission. So why have a small subset have an ad hoc to discuss it, have the entire board and commission have a discussion about it? That's why there's a distinction on that.
I guess I'm just thinking if we're going to be coming up with the policies and the way that we're going to be managing those groups, that's probably a bigger conversation that we would want to have, here in the commission, with everyone. And it would be probably more effective to have it with just a few of us discussing, okay, these are the different ideas that we have for managing these work groups. These are the opportunities for bringing in the public. So I just was thinking it would be more effective to have a small group of us decide. That's all.
Commissioner McCray?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions for Mr. Doimus. First of all, do we have the ability at this meeting to go ahead and do this work as Director Wiltshire had suggested?
I believe,
Are we properly noticed?
if I could just see quickly the agenda again, thank you. Yes, you do. As the Brown Act says, it could be 20 words or less, as long as it gives substantive direction or information of what that'll be about. So definitely under this meeting, you can do so.
And I would suggest that we do that because in the interim, all of our work groups or subcommittees are going to be hamstrung to do any work until their actual structure is reestablished. So my next question is, should we undertake this as two actions, one to dissolve and then another to establish at least?
That's up to the commission's prerogative decision. In answering Commissioner Nelson's concern, I said that a possibility for you to do is, in one hand, dissolve and then create a and reborn out of it as a workshop. So
a single vote on the whole action?
you could definitely do a motion for that. Absolutely.
Great, thank you very much.
Yes, I mean, I'm going to agree with Commissioner McCray. Yeah, I mean, if we're going to do this, I think we should, just kind of figure this out. And in regards to just one of the subcommittees I'm on the request for proposal subcommittee, and we haven't met in the past year because there was really no issue to meet. But I think the year prior to that, we discussed the request for proposal committee met regarding a new lease with Sea Landing. And so I'm just kind of wondering, just as a case study, if there was no request for proposal subcommittee in place, just how would that have been handled by the Commission Waterfront when something like that arises?
Yeah, Commissioner Stanwyck, that's a great question and a really good example. Requests for proposals, those are something that would come to the Harbor Commission very soon, so there'd be a lot of time. If it was something that was routine or that the entire Harbor Commission deemed they could handle at a Harbor Commission meeting, that would be an acceptable place. But that would be a perfect example of the Harbor Commission creating an ad hoc work group if more work needed to be done. So at that time, instead of having the RFP subcommittee just sort of standing there for years on end waiting for work to do, you could more nimbly create it, assign 3 members to it, and they could go off and do the work and sort of achieve essentially the same thing that the RFP subcommittee would do, but it would give the Harbor Commission the ability to do so or not do so. So if it was a more routine RFP, maybe the entire commission would agree that, hey, we can just handle this here on the dais at a Harbor Commission meeting, and so that would really be kind of more flexibility and power given to you as Harbor Commission.
Okay, no, that makes sense. I guess also if the issue is upcoming, would that be something that the waterfront bring to the commission's attention then? Or would that be something that we would kind of have to notify on our own and then go ahead and form the ad hoc subcommittee or the workshop?
Yeah, Commissioner, another good question, and so that's sort of the timing thing. Most policy topics or lease stuff or RFP, we try to bring it to you kind of well in advance, enough time to not be pressured into making a decision at that meeting. And so if we were to bring a policy topic to you, say slip assignment or slip something budget, there would usually be plenty of time to hear it at that meeting, deliberate on it, and kind of request or direct staff to agendize it for the next meeting where you could establish a subcommittee. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, some of that onus is on staff to try and make sure you as a commission have enough time to properly deliberate and deal with things. And so we typically try and give enough buffer for it not to have to be decided at that exact specific meeting the first time you hear of it.
Okay, great. Also, I still have one follow-up question regarding the subcommittees. Do they have specific goals or mandates or defined?
Commissioner Snyder, our current subcommittees?
Right, yeah.
No,
Okay,
they don't.
okay, thank you.
I don't know that I mean,
Hold on, please. Wait.
yeah, go
If
ahead.
you want to speak, hit the request on your screen. We're going to go to Commissioner Anderson.
If Hands is more in line with, in theme, mine's kind of a different theme, but I'm happy to go.
Sure. I just wanted to speak to Manager Wiltshire's comment that the subcommittees don't have goals, I think is what I heard you said.
Commissioner, I know you're going, they do have goals and objectives. I don't know if Commissioner Stanwyck was looking for some sort of more policy or structure. Are they guided by anything?
Gotcha, okay, because
Maybe
crucial
that was
subcommittee,
my
we've got
fault.
goals.
Yeah. We've got goals.
Okay, Commissioner Anderson.
Thank you. Yes, so my comment comes, my experience on the subcommittees is really just on the cruise ship. I'm also on the budget one, but that one's been less active. But my experience on the cruise ship was we started as the ad hoc committee, and it was 3 commissioners meeting frequently and often, which was great. But we were kind of spinning our wheels. We were coming up with ideas, but it didn't feel like we're getting nearly the amount of traction now that we've become a subcommittee. We've got real support from the staff. Take our last meeting, for example, where we had 50+ public attendance, and we had staff, and we had some real experts giving us, in my opinion, one of the most informational sessions we've had. And my fear is if we lose all the subcommittees, what commitment do we have from the staff to still support our research and not just go back to where we were just the handful of us kind of spinning our tires? Is there any sort of allotment? I know on one degree it's great because if we're not an official subcommittee, it saves a lot of admin hours, but maybe there's some advantage there where we're not doing as much admin hours, and now you could help us kind of tie things together and get things to the forefront.
Yeah, Commissioner Anderson, great question and totally fair concern. We're pretty maxed out as is, so we're supporting all of the subcommittees as if they were essentially Harbor Commission meetings. So, and we're available to do that. The beauty of the work group is that's sort of at your discretion. So if you want to stand up a meeting and utilize our resources in the conference room and us putting things together, we're there for you. The thought is that it probably wouldn't be more than we're doing today because we're 100% subcommittees right now. And so the bandwidth that we have right now, we're making it work. And so our intent is for you can collaborate with staff only, you can collaborate with the public on your own. There may be value in doing that, right? It doesn't have to be confined to that sort of meeting. So I really see it as more of a tool that gives you more flexibility, and we can certainly kind of agree to provide the level of resources that we're providing now for the meetings going forward.
Commissioner Cohen?
Just a question. Do you know how many subcommittee meetings there were last year that you had to support?
Commissioner Cohen, I don't know offhand, but probably a dozen, maybe 10 or 12. So like the equivalent of another amount of Harbor Commission meetings. So either maybe the same or more than there were Harbor Commission meetings. And it ebbs and flows. I mean, some years there wasn't. When we were doing the slip assignment, we were meeting every month in addition to Harbor Commission meetings. So it really kind of goes up and down.
Those were good, though, because we were in lockdown, and it was something to do, right? It was. Commissioner Hanrahan, did you have another?
I did, just quickly, thank you, Chair. It seems that we could quickly take a look at these groups and just make a decision of the three choices it sounds like we have in front of us for each of the various committees. Is it a full subcommittee? Seems like for now, it's just the cruise ship is the full subcommittee. Is it an ad hoc, or is it just a good idea that we'll get together and talk about another time? I mean, it doesn't seem that we have a lot. Maybe we can just take a quick look at these as a group tonight, or let's book it for our very next meeting and take some time to think about what each of us would do with each of the groups. I feel like if we were to look at the groups that we had in the past, we could quickly make the decision, is this an ad hoc, is this a subcommittee, or should this group be, let rest for a bit?
So if we were to push it ahead, right, the entire matter, would you have another subcommittee meeting in mind scheduled before that happens?
Chair, another subcommittee for cruise ships or
Yes,
another?
Yes.
Would we have another? We will have another subcommittee meeting of cruise ships on February 22nd. Do you mean in addition to that?
Yes.
Those are scheduled quarterly, so we probably won't have another one of those for 2 to 3 months.
Okay.
Chair Stedman, if I may too, I think also just to help in terms of the conversation, I kind of want to harken back to the differences, so at least everyone knows between a standing and ad hoc. And so, a subcommittee has a fixed meeting schedule, like we just talked about cruise ships and quarterly. There's no fixed meeting schedule. I mean, if there's an issue that's really hot, there isn't anything limiting how many times you could meet within a week even. So that's one. Obviously, standing committees have a more longer continuing jurisdiction over an issue or subject matter versus ad hoc or work. I like calling them working groups, are short term. And as I mentioned, ad hocs or working groups are advisory only. Standing committees at times can be advisory decision making. So those are the main differences. And of course, the final main difference, subcommittees, as we know, Brown Act applies, and working group, no. So, but both are open to the public or anything else like that.
Commissioner Nelson, do you still have a question?
Yes. I want to buttress Commissioner Anderson's concern about staff support. And I do this gingerly because I'm not suggesting that staff doesn't work awfully hard all the time. They do. I know they do, and they do great work. But right now, the staff support that the standing committees are receiving is inadequate. To deal with this, I took the workshop on priorities a little more seriously, I think, than I should have. But one of my issues was, in fact, the committees. And we use these committees as sort of our way of dealing with our constituents, our stakeholders. It's our way of dealing with our people, if you will, our customers. And so it's really important that we're responsive. And right now, we're not. And I'm saying you can only do so much with the staff you've got. So my recommendation was that in addition to trying to come up with a legitimate scope of work, that we actually look into how we're going to staff these things. And I made the suggestion, I was admonished the first time I did that when we were talking about personnel assignments, that there were a number of vacancies that were left open for 2 years. And I'm not saying that there wasn't a task to be done by those vacancies that were open for 2 years. But I'm saying that kind of analysis needs to be done. Are there positions that are currently to go into some other function that need to be reassigned, reclassified to address the workload of this? Because let's take the business activity permit group that I became a chair of, and at the end of the meeting, I said, I thought it was a great idea that the waterfront director and our city council, basically said, let us take a shot at rewriting this 30-year-old policy. Well, it sounded good to me. And when I asked how long will that take, the answer was 5 to 6 weeks. We're now at 5 months. So there's a disconnect there between that activity. And if it takes 2 months to get a meeting scheduled, I just think that staff resources for this, if we're going to have 4 working groups or 5 working groups, whether it's a working group or whether it's a standing committee, there's a lot that we need from staff. I'm just being honest about it and blunt about it. And we're kidding ourselves if we don't. And so I just think part of our negotiations or the process we follow will look at staff. Because right now, I don't think it's sufficient. So, that said, thank you.
Fair enough. Mr. City Attorney?
Thank you. Actually, it's a really good issue you bring up, Commissioner Nelson. And to answer your question directly and even bluntly, the purpose of working committees, the heavy lifting is actually done by the commission, right? It's actually, and I'll explain how the structure for it allows for it, right? Because you don't have to have a fixed meeting schedule. You can meet frequently. The Brown Act doesn't apply. And it allows you, because you have less than a quorum, you're not worrying about the Brown Act, and you're going over workload, you're spending time doing that. And then you can assign, like, okay, if we're dealing with staff vacancy issues, all right, I will call maybe Director Wiltshire on a Wednesday, set up a meeting to get information from that. You know, workshops are a great resource because they get a lot done. They're labor intensive, absolutely. And I saw it with the Community Formation Committee when they had their work groups. But they are commission driven in terms of the workload and not staff. And because there's no mixed meeting schedule, you don't have to worry about, setting up meetings and all that. But the work of those workshops are driven and carried by the commission members.
So in other words, the committee or the work group on business activity permits would actually redesign, redraft, revise the 30-year-old policy.
If as a workshop, if that was the scope, you would meet with constituents, you would start working on it, you would take, for example, a draft, start making recommendations, then meet with staff in terms of recommendations, then present to the commission. Yeah, absolutely. Because the one thing when you have an advisory board to council, which as you saw in the 2013 guideline, you advise to council. What power you don't have, and any of the council advisory commissions, is you're not allowed to administratively direct staff to do something, right? That power, like I want you to do this. That commission doesn't have that power to do it, and no commission. Now, the city council's obviously a different story. So, yes, that would be exactly that. That would be exactly
I'm just saying
that.
that's what you're suggesting to me.
That's exactly what I'm suggesting.
And so now what I see is I see a collision. And where will that collision occur between what staff can do in the waterfront department and what we think is the policy? It's going to happen here at the Harbor Commission meeting.
It could be 100, but we could be going 100 steps ahead. I mean, part of that as you're working through a work group, you're meeting with all parties, constituents, depending on the matter, and part of that obviously with staff. And here's the work we've uncovered so far. Having a meeting with staff. Some meetings may involve staff on that, right? Getting input, and then yes, there sometimes is a collision in terms of recommendations with staff and the board, and that's okay, right? Because that's part of the process.
And I hate to talk against my own self-interest here as chair of the Fisheries Work Group. When the city council says, for example, we want you to promote the local seafood industry. That's not just, and how do we do that? Well, we've got 180 small businesses coming in and out of the harbor every day. But my gosh, we need more slips. So what we say is, instead of having 8% of the slips in the harbor, we want 19%. That's going to collide right here. I bring that here without talking with Mike and with staff.
I'm
I
not
mean, I just
suggesting
think
that.
to do that would be almost irresponsible for us to come in here and everybody I talk to, the stakeholders say, this industry, we can incentivize more boats coming in, but we got to have more slips because it's too expensive to put them in guest slips.
Sure.
So we come in with a recommendation, give us this percentage or that percentage. And Mike, who's trying to manage his budget, he's going, good God, that's way too many just discounted slips. So that's going to occur here.
Well, no, well,
at
the
these
thought,
harbor
well, the thought
commission
with
meetings.
the workshop is, no, there would be a time you meet with staff, this is what we're hearing of what we, for example, this example of what we need a percentage of slips. And that conversation can occur in meeting with staff, in terms of when a work group is coming up with a recommendation, you definitely want to meet with staff to get their input when you're presenting it here. Now, at the end of the day, if you're having a meeting with a work group with staff and you can't see eye to eye in terms of your final product, so be it. And that's what I'm saying where the collision occurred. But you definitely don't want to have a full recommendation when you're providing an advisory opinion on an issue and not meet with staff on that. And that occurs through the work group process. What I'm saying is, who's driving the work group, who's doing the work, all that are the commissioners. But they also should be meeting with staff to understand more information. And in no way am I recommending staff being not at some of these meetings when they're needed, but there may be some meetings where they're not needed. There may be some meetings where the focus will be on meeting with the fishermen. Another focus will be meeting with staff. And you want to have a good finished work product where you're reaching out and getting all input. That's all I'm saying. But as I mentioned, the heavy lifting when it comes to these is commission driven versus staff, because the commission is the one forming the advisory opinion, not staff.
I hear you loud and clear. I just want to throw out some scenarios that I can envision occurring.
Commissioner Cohen?
I'll just ask on that. I think for me, it would be great to have a better understanding of if we're going to be operating on our own. Obviously, we don't have the capacity to put things up on the website, for example, if we wanted public to be able to comment on an issue, or if we felt that would be, so I really feel like having an understanding of how these committees would work and what powers they would have, because what I'm hearing is that they wouldn't have really any power outside of, us just being able to meet. So that for me would give me a lot more confidence in this transition if I knew if there were guidelines. And on that note, if we are ahead of the curve, can we get that information before we make such a big decision? Because personally, I think the Brown Act has a lot of positives. We keep talking about it as some negative thing that we can do away with. But, as Commissioner Anderson has said, that's been, such a huge, huge piece of the puzzle in trying to get work done is involving the public. That's where, and that's our role. I mean, that's really what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be the voice of the public.
Commissioner Cohen, if I can answer that, yeah, absolutely. And the pace you want to go on this is up to the commission. Like I said, you have an option tonight. The way it's agendized is perfectly appropriate. You can, set this off continued. You can go with where the city is going, with council direction about, eliminating some of these subcommittees and keeping it most of the time in here. But then there's work studies that need to be done. And the work with the Civil Service Commission, the Community Formation Commission, yes, they can be advertisements for the public on websites, on the Harbor Commission website. Nothing's precluding that, any outreach, if you want public participation. So all that can be done. The power that a working group has is they get together, work on an issue, investigate, look at it, and they come up with a recommendation, right? And that's the purpose, and that's the power that the working group would have.
I think I understand that, but it's just really helpful to be able to go back to documents and say, okay, this is the way this is going to work, or this is what we can do, this is what we can't do.
Absolutely.
And with no documentation for how these groups would function and how we would be able to reach out, it's just, you're kind of asking us to jump into the unknown. And I think that's where, at least I'll just speak for myself, I feel unease because we have a system that we're all familiar with, that we've worked with. I mean, I've worked in it both as, well, not as a commissioner yet, but also as a member of the public, and I see that value. So I think that piece of the puzzle is really missing for me.
Yeah, and Commissioner, just to that point, we're kind of operating in a gray area as is. We don't have guidelines for these subcommittees where, again, we're unique as a commission. We have a lot of them. And Assistant City Attorney Doimus can speak to this as well, but this is something that is coming towards us as well. Like, we might not be operating in a viable space, and so we're kind of trying to provide an opportunity for all of that work to continue to be done. So I know that there might be an absence of clarity where we're going. John's been fairly clear with what the roles and what ad hoc committees can and can't do. My thought is that we're going to either collectively make a decision as this or get forced into it, either legally or by city council. And so we're kind of trying to get ahead of it a little bit.
I understand that, but the Brown Act is what we're operating on right now when it comes to the subcommittees, and that is very clear. So when we're saying that we're not going to be operating underneath that, because that's the piece of the puzzle that I'm most concerned about, is where does the public get to voice, where's the transparency?
I'd like to raise a question for Commissioner Hanrahan. Can you quickly do a comparative analysis between your experience with the ad hoc process versus the subcommittee process, maybe benefits and detriments?
Sure. Thank you, Chair. Certainly, when the cruise ship subcommittee was running as an ad hoc, we met, Commissioner Anderson and Stedman and I met much more frequently. Much better exchange of ideas, frankly. This was all in preparation to dig into the cruise ship question, how we would address the public, what were the key questions, what were the goals that we were looking to establish. Once we got farther down the road with the ad hoc, the commission suggested that we move to become a subcommittee. When we did that, it definitely, while it felt like we were sort of elevated in significance or importance, but constrained in our ability to really communicate. So I'd say that change from ad hoc to subcommittee increased perhaps public interaction. Everything we do now has the public involved, whereas the ad hoc, it was much more loose and communicating amongst commissioners. So, but it's difficult to plan, upcoming subcommittee meetings amongst ourselves because we can't communicate via email or text or even, the three of us, getting together. So the challenges are real when you become a subcommittee. Frankly, Chair Stedman said from the start, like, ad hoc is not a bad place to be because you have more freedom and the ability to communicate amongst your fellow commissioners. So I view, frankly, I think it's a great place to be for an evolving work group to be in an ad hoc position without staff involvement except when needed. And it was certainly our experience when we needed staff support, it was available. Now we can't get rid of them.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Nelson?
And John, there's no problem with a working group scheduling a public meeting. It can meet with 3 stakeholders, as my understanding. I could meet with 3 stakeholders, staff, commercial fishermen, seafood processors or whatever, and then say, I want to see how the public feels about this, and we could schedule a public meeting. So just because we disengage from the Brown Act doesn't mean we can't build the public into our process. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct.
Okay, thank you. So the public can be involved in what we do.
Are there any requests from the public to speak on this item?
I do have one speaker slip. Chris Voss?
How's it going, Chris?
Chair Stedman, it's going well, thank you.
Is your mic on?
I don't know.
Okay, it is now.
How about now? Okay. My name is Chris Foss, and I represent the commercial fishermen of Santa Barbara. And I'd like to thank you all for this discussion that I just was exposed to. I think it was incredibly informative. I wrote notes prior to your discussion, and a lot of what you delved into addressed some of the things that I want to emphasize. I support the ad hoc concept, and I believe that it allows stakeholders to engage in a more constructive way with commissioners, recognizing that we're going to need staff engagement too, because oftentimes we need data points. We need Angela and Jeanette to come up with the numbers with respect to things that we're diving into and we want an understanding of. And so this discussion around staff support is critical to stakeholders' ability to have quality information to guide our understanding of impacts to the Harbor Department's budget and what benefits we can potentially pursue. The other thing that is critical is how we move from our discussions in the work groups to this body. And so ultimately, obviously, any progress that's going to bring about meaningful change is going to have to be decided by this body, and if there's money involved, my understanding has to go to the city council. And so there's quite a bit of public process that's going to be involved if we dive into substantive issues and make recommendations to this body in an ad hoc working group, and then if they're really substantial, they end up going to the city council, if I understand things correctly. So there's plenty of opportunity for the public to weigh in and influence the process at different points, even though we may operate, as Commissioner Nelson suggested, in these more independent fashions prior to bringing these issues to the full commission. And then, so just to recap, I believe we would be well served, the commercial fishing community, by focused engagements that have a time frame associated with them on discrete topics. That helps us, right? And then those can evolve and then be renewed. If new, more substantial issues come about, we can re-up the ad hoc committee and pursue those discussions around a new issue. And so I think it all can work under this new concept, and I support the idea of diving into it ASAP, as Commissioner McCray suggested, and then Mr. Adams or Stanwyck supported as well. So if it's possible to do it this evening, I think it would be worthwhile. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Commissioner Nelson?
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Commissioner Cohen?
Could I ask a quick question? Sorry, could I ask you a question? Do you have any concerns about not having public comment on these issues that you've been able to in the past? In
which forum?
Well, the only forum would be then taking it to the Harbor Commission or taking it to, like you say, the City Council, and there's a lot of information that's being absorbed. Whereas in a small group, when we have the subcommittee meeting, there's more of a,
Well, my objective as a stakeholder, a representative, a specific stakeholder
Sure.
group, would be to get as many members of my community in the ad hoc subcommittee meeting as possible. So we'd have as much diversity in our perspectives at that place. But then the objective would be to focus our, desires on a discrete ask. And then we would, of course, bring that kind of idea to the full commission, and then hopefully we would have 10 or 15 guys that support the ideal in front of this group, so that it would be recognized it wasn't just Chris Voss's concept or, you know, any other individuals. It was a broadly recognized, valuable step, or broadly supported step forward. So I think that I think protects us in our efforts to not just cater to a small fraction of any one stakeholder group, in that the ultimate decisions should be in front of this group.
Okay, thank you.
Any other public comment, Angela?
I have no additional speaker slips, and there's nobody online with their hand raised.
Well, commissioners, we're free to deliberate, or someone can put forward a motion.
I have
Yes, Commissioner McCray.
Yes, inasmuch as stakeholders brought forward the BAP issue, I think that we should consider it as part of one of the work groups that we establish in this, rather than simply dissolving it.
Very well.
Chair Stedman and commissioners, just for a piece of advice, not to, the staff has revised the draft of the BAP policy, and we're planning to bring it back to the full commission in March or April, schedule depending, just so you have that information. So that was the request of staff as Commissioner Nelson mentioned, in November or whenever we met on that. So we have completed that.
Commissioner Hanrahan?
I was just going to make the suggestion that can commissioners who have a group in mind that they would like to maintain an ad hoc status, can they speak to that group? Right now, we have a cruise ship subcommittee, we have a budget work group, and we have a commercial fishing work group. Assuming those two, the budget and commercial fishing, are ad hoc for now, or I'm just trying to get us through this process. Can we speak to the groups that we want and give them a label and vote on it?
Yeah, I think we're fortunate to have Attorney Doimus with us here. This wasn't always the case at the Harbor Commission, right? So I appreciate your presence, because, you know, you can see the question that's being formed here, right? You know, can we bifurcate this or break it up into parts, or do we just have to create a motion, you know, to dissolve and or create work groups?
Sure. Chair Stedman, you can piece this out however you would like. If you want, at this point, you want to continue it, you want to piecemeal some that you feel certain and confident about tonight, and then put an agenda, another one for the next meeting, whatever the commission should desire. We would just put on the same kind of description for the next meeting, you know, if you need more time or whatever. Yeah, so it's up to the commission tonight how they want to work this through.
And Chair Stedman and Commission, for future items that are policy related or big picture items, staff can include a line item on the agenda to allow for the creation of a work group. And so any major topic coming forth, we can just kind of include that. And so that gives you the ability and the freedom at that meeting to create a work group for any sort of new business item that we're seeing.
I'm glad you said that, because, you know, that occurred to me too. If we just keep kicking the can ahead, right? I mean, we're, to Commissioner Nelson's point, you know, becoming even slower, right? So we've been advised, right, by our attorney, and we can deliberate now, or we can break this up. Does anybody want to put forth any of the commissioners want to put forth a motion on this subject? Commissioner Anderson?
I just have maybe one last thing to add before any motions are made that maybe would put some people at ease, is maybe we could create the working groups before dissolving the subcommittees, if anyone's worried about losing. Create first and then get rid of it to ensure that it's still on a list. If that comforts anyone, then maybe that's an idea before we make a motion.
Commissioner McCray?
I think we have available to us to go ahead and put the whole package, build the package, and then vote on it. And just in deliberations, we can build the package. one big vote, so we have it all in front of us, which ones we're going to bring forward now as work groups, including the cruise ship as these suggestions, plus any other existing subcommittees that people want to bring forward as a work group at this point. So what's Commissioner's desire?
My two are at the top of the list, so I don't know.
Director Wiltshire, can you go back to the page with all of the, there you go. Is that helpful?
Commissioner, or Vice Chair Stanwyck?
In regards to the budget, I guess for me, the biggest concern is I don't want to set a precedent for us not to ever meet besides the main commission meeting, because I thought it was helpful actually to meet in advance just to get an idea of just all the individual expenditures and all the individual revenue streams that we have. And so I guess just looking forward for this year and for next year with this, I'm just wondering how that's going to work for the budget. Would that be something, once again, would we have to request then because without staff, without the staff's resources, we can't get those budget numbers. And so I'm just concerned how that would work for us in making a decision, or at least collectively meeting without that crucial information that would be necessary to even make any kind of decision regarding the budget.
Yeah, good question, Commissioner Stanwyck. That's why we recommended to continue that as a budget work group. For now, we're entering into our 2-year budget cycle, so taking an action tonight to create a budget work group and selecting members would be a good thing to do. We can set up a meeting with that. It doesn't have to be a public meeting at this point. You can meet directly with staff. We can meet in the waterfront classroom, go over all the numbers, take as deep of a dive as you want, and then report back to the full Harbor Commission prior to hearing the budget or at the budget meeting when we bring it all back. So did that answer your question? And then going into future budget cycles, we can provide opportunities at either our mid-year budget review or at this same time next year, an opportunity to, if that was something that was useful, create a budget work group again to accomplish the same task.
Okay, great, thanks. Yeah, in knowing that there was the opportunity to meet prior to the actual full Harbor Commission meeting regarding the budget, I think I would be fine with that, speaking from being a member on the Budget Commission. And also in terms of the request for proposal, I'm on that committee, and I would be fine to totally dissolve that and have that be on an as-needed basis. When the opportunity comes up, then we would obviously take that, whatever lease proposal is, and we'd start a work group. So.
Chair Stedman, if I may too, and to help
Yes, sir.
assure the commission too, in doing any of your work, as I mentioned, where there's a line where you can't administratively direct, don't ever get that confused with not being able to get information like Director Wiltshire just talked about and creating that process. That's how you do your work. How else are you going to make recommendations without getting that information? So you're always able to do that. And I'm also very impressed with everyone's knowledge about how working groups do work and the advantages and disadvantages. So that was just my one comment to make clear. There's nothing ever stopping individual commissioners or being part of a work group getting that information that's ever needed on that.
So do we have a motion to go forward here? Does anybody want to take a?
I'll take a stab at it. Angela, could you move us to the next slide again? So I would move that we rescind all the subcommittees and reestablish the cruise ship subcommittee, the budget subcommittee as a budget work group, the commercial fishing subcommittee as a commercial fishing work group, and then also add the chartering and business activity permit subcommittee as a charter and business activity permit work group, so that particular, so that constituents have a chance to actually meet before it's presented before the commission and we take a vote without their input.
And Commissioner Nelson, would you like to retain a work group for the slip assignment? for the purpose of determining that valuation method?
Because that's one where we can very easily come up with the scope of work for that group.
And I
Sure.
would add that to my motion.
Did you capture all that, Angela? Could you read it back, please?
So a motion by Commissioner McCray to rescind all of the subcommittees except for the cruise ship subcommittee. And then instead of the budget subcommittee, it's going to become a work group. Instead of the commercial fishing subcommittee, it's going to become a work group. Same with chartering and business activity permits and slip assignment. So,
Second?
Uh,
I just have a question.
Yes.
There are several of these that, I don't know if we're also saying that the current commissioners are going to, sorry. I don't know if we're saying that the current commissioners are also going to serve on these new work groups, and several of them have vacancies.
We,
and I'm
we
wondering-
can make those personnel assignments after we vote on the motion.
Okay, great.
Which is what we normally do. Vice Chair?
Yes, I was hoping that probably, maybe before we do take a vote, I think it would just be a good idea to define the goal of or the task of the work group, just, I think, for everybody's benefit. I know for me, I can speak towards budget. I know the main objective of that is to debate and to, I guess, deliberate on all of the fees, all of the line items, and then eventually the goal is to bring it to the commission at either the March or April meeting and pass the budget. So, I mean, I know that having a work group for the budget, that seems logical to me, that there's an end goal and an end task for the work group, and that's the whole reason why it's formed. So I think that would be just good, I think, for everybody to, so that we have some kind of objective for each work group.
Commissioner Anderson?
I guess the only thing if we add to your motion or make a new motion, would be to Director Wilshire's point about adding the clause at each agenda item where we can have the ability to vote on creating a working group on that particular meeting if something comes up.
Yeah, I think there can even be a separate motion.
Separate motion. Okay.
I want to make sure we have this particular motion defined well. And I like your suggestion, Vice Chair. I don't think every working group needs to be on the spot to define their mission tonight, but if you have it readily available, top of mind, you're welcome to state that. You did second the motion, right, Commissioner Hanrahan?
I did.
Okay. Looks like we're having technical.
No, we're just trying to get the names up there, because I know where you're going to go next. It's going to be assigning people.
Right.
Do it real time, so you guys can deliberate when we get.
Okay, all right.
Sorry about that.
Wait.
So which groups did we effectively can? Just the RFP? Okay.
Yeah,
Much ado.
right. So Angela, we do have the motion and seconded. We're ready for a vote.
Commissioner Cohen,
Yes.
Commissioner Hanrahan,
Yes.
Commissioner McCray,
Yes.
Commissioner Nelson,
Yes?
Commissioner Stanwyck,
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Chair Stedman.
Yes.
That's unanimous.
Okay, now let's address the issue that you brought up, Commissioner Anderson.
I'd like to create a motion to allow the commissioners to create a working group on any item that's on the agenda going forward.
All right, do we have a second?
Yeah, I'll second that.
Okay.
Commissioner Hanrahan,
Yes.
Commissioner McCray,
Yes.
Commissioner Nelson,
Yes?
Commissioner Stanwyck,
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Cohen,
Yes.
Chair Stedman.
Yes.
That's unanimous.
All right, very well. We made it through that deliberative process. That I was going for quite a while.
Nicely done. Chair?
Okay, so now we get to the fun part, Commissioner Cohen, when we start moving names around. So we do have vacancy on budget work group. Do we have anybody who wants to step in there?
I'd be happy to.
There you go. That's how easy it is. And how about the business activity work group?
I would like to stay on that. I have support.
Okay. That's only two, right? I'll join you. And then slip. No, I'll be on the. Right, so we know that Commissioner Nelson and myself will be on the slip assignment work group.
I'll-
And,
I'll volunteer for the open spot if no one wants it.
oh, good. Okay,
If someone else wants it.
yeah. We're letting, Ms. Rodriguez catch up here. Who's typing? Oh, Caesar's typing, okay. All right, Stedman, Nelson, and Cohen. All right, and then did you get the names for the BAP? That's McCray, Nelson, and Stedman. Okay. Right. Did we miss anything? It's, the Commissioner Cohen, this is generally how it works. We would start just moving, chess pieces on the board. So, that informally. All right. I think we're ready to move on to the department update. Oh. We're voting on the changes. All right, so we need a motion.
I move that we accept the assignments as listed on the screen.
All right, now we can vote.
Commissioner McCray?
Aye.
Commissioner Nelson? Aye. Commissioner Stanwyck?
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson?
Yes.
Commissioner Cohen?
Yes.
Commissioner Hanrahan?
Aye, aye.
Chair Stedman?
Aye.
That's unanimous.
Okay. I'm glad, you know what, this body, as it is currently composed, is doing a really good job. You guys are super learners, so I appreciate that. Can we go to the director's update?
Perfect. Thanks, Chair Stedman and Commissioners. I'll be relatively brief. Two items on my, do you want to go to mine? I just really have two items to talk about on my director's report. So the first one, kind of dovetailing on Commissioner Stanwyck's update, but a little bit of a recap on the prioritization workshop. And then my second item will be a recap on a cruise ship site visit that myself and Chris Bell went to a couple weeks ago on the Crown Princess down in Port of LA. Next slide. So as Commissioner Stanwyck mentioned, we recently had a priority setting workshop on January 4th in the waterfront classroom. 6 of 7 harbor commissioners were present. Unfortunately, Commissioner Hanrahan had a conflict and couldn't make it. Waterfront city staff and city attorney were present. This was a new process, so we hadn't gone through something like this in the past. The objectives were fairly clear to collectively gather input from all of the harbor commissioners, really provide valuable feedback to staff, and help us sort of build our agendas in the future. And so a reminder that there were really no actions taken at this meeting. It was sort of a brainstorming, feedback gathering session. Next slide. One of the key tools that we used was new again. We hadn't used it in the past. It was called Mentimeter. It was a polling software. And this screenshot on the screen is showing one of the word clouds, kind of one of the fun things it did, and it just kind of gathered input from all of the harbor commissioners on just kind of a wide array of priority topics. Next slide. Some of the specific topics and takeaways included kind of frequency of various agenda items heard by the commission. So I think this was some of the most powerful information gathered. So with respect to department updates, the sort of regular staff updates that we give, the preferred frequency and the feedback that we heard seemed that department staff updates were going to be done on an as-needed basis. And so what this means is that staff will be really kind of prioritize those and make those meaningful for things that we feel either the commission really needs input on or that we as staff kind of need to get out to the public or get Harbor Commission's input on. With respect, and another topic is with respect to budget updates. So currently we provide quarterly budget updates. So that's 4 budget updates a year in addition to the annual budget process. So that's really 5, maybe sometimes 6 budget-related processes a year. The feedback received indicated that biannual or twice a year budget updates would be preferred. So going forward, staff will plan to do biannual budget updates in addition to the annual budget process. So this would mean our mid-year update and then an end-of-year update and then kind of what we're entering into now, which is our new budget process. Just as a note, this is more in line with council and some other boards and commissions, and it will be more efficient. It'll free up some time for new business. Next slide. One of the other topics that was brought to the prioritizing workshop was just generally receiving third-party informational and educational presentations. So the feedback that we received was that indicated kind of status quo or as needed was preferred. And so there's really value in these. And so just a reminder that these are sort of one-off presentations. These aren't presentations or technical advice that are surrounding other policy efforts or work groups. These are really just sort of one-off Harbor Commission informational presentations. So with that, staff will continue to schedule these as needed. We typically do between 1 and 3 sort of informational presentations a year based on what's going on in the environment, what's going on with neighboring agencies. So we'll kind of continue to bring those to the Harbor Commission as needed. Next slide. With respect to lease activity, so the waterfront has 61 licenses and leases, and so that really requires a lot of regular management. So currently the Harbor Commission makes recommendations to council and hears essentially all of our lease activity on full new business. So we handle all of our lease activity as new business, which includes a staff report, a full PowerPoint. And so as we talked about at the start of the meeting, and we saw during the consent calendar, in general, the feedback received that there is a lot of room to move some of this to the consent calendar to make it a little more expedient. A reminder that items on the consent calendar still come with a full staff report. They have all that information available. They can still be open for public comment. Any commissioner can pull them at any time. The commission can even pull them and vote to bring them back next month as a fully agendized item with a PowerPoint and all that. So it doesn't remove any control, but for a lot of routine items, it sort of creates a little bit more efficiency. So in general, as we saw today, staff will start utilizing the consent calendar for more routine lease items. For lease items that are a little more involved, and so new leases, sale of leases, change of use, these things that are a little more involved, staff will still plan to bring a full PowerPoint presentation and get to have them on the agenda as new business. Next slide. Here's a little snapshot of the tool at work, and so this was an information gathering effort that looked at some of our larger policy-related new business topics. In general, staff will kind of use this feedback to continue to work with Harbor Commission and work groups, and hopefully it'll be kind of a backdrop to prioritize some of our efforts moving forward. Next slide. And then here was a look at some additional feedback received just on a variety of other new business topics. And again, we'll utilize this as sort of a backbone to continue to work with Harbor Commission and help us set agendas going forward. Next slide. In conclusion, so it seems amongst Harbor Commissioners, the workshop was very helpful. I can say firsthand for staff, it was very helpful. I thought it was nice to kind of have that level of discussion and to be able to move through that much material that sort of quickly and nimbly. We received valuable feedback, and we're kind of already putting it into play real time. So this is kind of a great step forward for efficiency and for us being able to handle the work that Harbor Commission wants to handle. Next slide. So here's a look at a tentative calendar for agenda items for 23. Again, none of this is set in stone, but we did this in the last couple years, and it sort of allows Harbor Commissioners to kind of get an idea of what's running up. I've color-coded it. The items in green are those items that we're required to do. The topics in blue are some of these tentative topics that we have a little bit more discretion over. Staff will send out this exact draft to Harbor Commission after the meeting so that you all have it. Realistically, staff is sort of tasked with trying our best to kind of look ahead and create these items. Some of them require a little more prep than others. And so at least from staff's point of view, having sort of a run up and at least some sort of a loose schedule really helps tee these items up. So with that, I'll turn it back to the commission before my next item for any questions on the priority setting session. But if there's no questions, I can move on to updating on our cruise ship tour.
Any idea who you might contact for the informational presentations?
Good question, Commissioner Stedman. I left those as kind of TBD to sort of see. We'd love for those to be semi-directed from the Harbor Commission.
Okay.
There were some suggestions through the prioritization workshop. There seemed to be an interest in environmental and sustainability efforts, and so that was kind of where my head was going. I was looking at some of those topics that were ranked a little higher to see if we can get speakers to come in and address some of those things.
Excellent. Looks like you're free to go.
Good. All right. It's in the same one. It's in the director's report. Yeah. I think it's slide 11. All right. So Chris Bell and myself recently went down to Port of LA and got a pretty in-depth tour of the Crown Princess. So super valuable for staff, and I want to preface this with that staff will present this as well to the cruise ship subcommittee next week, but I thought it was kind of pertinent to share with the entire Harbor Commission because it was a really interesting tour. The tour was led by Carnival and Holland America staff, and so it included their Director of Environmental Operations, Vice President of Environmental Operations, the Vessel Environmental Compliance Officer, and we also met with the ship's captain. It was a tour that was semi-driven by us. We were really just looking for waterfront staff to get a better idea of standard operating procedures, kind of see how these ships work. We as waterfront staff don't spend a huge amount of time on cruise ships. We definitely don't get to get down in the dirty stuff and look at what goes on in them. So it was really nice to do so. Carnival staff was accommodating, and they kind of afforded us access really anywhere we wanted to go in the ship. Next slide. There were a few major takeaways on our end, so the waterfront staff side of things. So one of the major takeaways was after touring the bridge with the captain and all of their environmental staff, it was really interesting to see this industry standard regulatory compliance software package that they use. So the system that they use is called One Ocean, and we received a hands-on tour of what that looks like, how they use it. It's essentially a GIS software that tracks where all the ship's movements, all their activities. So it tracks speed, location, all the discharges, emissions, really everything that goes on. They kind of likened it to a black box on an airplane. So if there ever is an incident, they can essentially download all that log data. It's all logged and stored and secure. So one great thing to see personally was that on the screen they have all of the regulatory compliance overlays, so the California Air Resources Board location, all of the International Maritime Organization, so all this overlapping requirements for ships, for discharges, emissions, and on that graph built into their software was our 12-mile radius around Santa Barbara. And so we talked to them a little bit about that, and it was just great to see that it's kind of built into their program. They said that Santa Barbara is above and beyond, we're one of the only local jurisdictions that kind of overlays an additional requirement in addition to what international, federal, and state do. So it was kind of nice for us to see that they're not just telling us that, it was baked into their software, and so that was really neat to see. Next slide. So we had a chance to go down into the lower portion of the ship, kind of the belly where all the major engine systems were and their waste management systems. So the two of the major systems that we were interested in were the advanced water treatment system and the oil water separator system. An advanced water treatment system really treats waste through biological and a filtration process, much like our wastewater treatment plant. They were open, they were transparent with this. We were able to sample some of the effluent. So they showed us some of the effluent that comes out of the advanced water waste treatment plant. It looked clear, kind of like water. Taking that one step further, we asked if they'd be willing for us to take a sample of that and test it, essentially take it to El Estero in our lab and test their effluent. They were open to that, so that could be something that we could do going forward. The oil water separator system was all quite impressive. Multi-stage system that essentially processes bilge water to separate oil and water. The thing that stood away, that was a big takeaway for us, was that the amount of security that is in place with those systems. So it was kind of like the nuclear codes. They were under dual lock that had to be opened by essentially the captain and the environmental compliance officer. All the equipments and valves were tamper-proof tagged, and so in talking to their staff, it's just really rigorous, the checks and balances for people to even operate those systems. So for me, that was the big takeaway. Next slide. And we also toured their trash and recycling center. So this one really blew me away. So every piece of trash on board the ship is hand sorted. So every single piece of trash comes down to this kind of recycling and trash center. Food waste runs through large digesters to reduce the amount of overall waste. Recyclables are separated from food waste along with trash and offloaded at port. And trash is either offloaded, and one of the interesting things is they do incinerate trash. And so if they're in a regulatory framework where they can incinerate it, they will, offshore per regulation, or they'll offload it at port. Next slide. Yeah, so in conclusion, really, really valuable for us. Got to ask a lot of questions. I got a lot of questions answered. For us, it really just allowed us to have a better understanding as staff to kind of respond to a lot of the things that are going on. I thought it was prudent to get down there and get into the ship. In a way, it opened a door so they were open to future visits. They were open to harbor commissioners visiting. They were open to, so there's kind of room to expand that if people have interest in touring a ship or looking at those systems. It was a Carnival Holland America ship. It was kind of one of their mid-level ships. It wasn't one of the newer ones. It wasn't one of the older ones, so it was kind of a nice average to tour. And Carnival Holland America make up 80% of the ships that typically serve Santa Barbara, so it was kind of a good representative tour. With that, I'm done my part, unless there are any questions on cruise ships. There's a buffet. I did see a buffet on board. If we're at Chair Stedman, I was going to make a recommendation. Is there any chance that Eric Engbretson could give his harbor operations report in advance of the facility report?
Yes, absolutely.
Yep, okay. So with that, I'll pass it over to Mr. Engbretson.
Good evening, Chair Stedman, our Harbor Commissioners. Eric Engebretson, Harbor Operations Manager. Going to give a quick a report on our emergency dredging and our scheduled maintenance dredging. So the Army Corps of Engineers awarded Pacific Dredge a 3-year contract that began, well, today. The biennial maintenance dredging will include spring and fall cycle and will end in fall of 2025. Each cycle will hopefully we'll get at least 120,000 cubic yards. And we are hoping to combine 2 cycles in this first phase, just because of the amount of sand that was deposited in the federal channel during the last storm. So the dredge yard is actually, they're staging all of their equipment on West Beach. I've got approximately 6,000 feet of pipe that will be eventually buried in the sand. And then the discharge sites will be east of Stearns Wharf. So currently, the discharge zone beginning for the spring cycle will be just to the east of the outfall dredge, excuse me, that would be the desal intake vault. And that's proposed to start right in this area. And then it will continue down farther into this footprint that the Army Corps has laid out along East Beach. They'll continue that in sections just to kind of re-establish sand along East Beach and be able to bury pipe as they move on. So just another aerial photo of currently where the yellow line you'll see is where the dredge pipe will continue, and then it'll continue to move on down to the blue rectangular area. Back to emergency dredging, just the update. There was 30,000 cubic yards that was deposited on East Beach, almost adjacent to the soccer field at 300 East Cabrillo Boulevard. That channel was opened on Saturday, January 28th. I was in communications with the dredge company daily as this emergency dredging took place. They gave me the go-ahead to notify slip holders on Saturday. The green light was at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I believe we got the information out to at least 1,800 people by 9:50 in the morning. And then this is just the post-storm sand scouring and accretion, and kind of a interesting slide put together by Chris Bell. And that was about 30,000 cubic yards of sand. And that concludes my report on the dredging, where we're at, and where we're going. And if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to help answer.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
First of all, I'd like to really thank you for taking this on and stepping to the plate. And I know it wasn't your bailiwick, but you were the one that, kind of knew the people in the right places to go to get it done. So thank you, and I hope you're being justly compensated for the extra work. First of all, I want to make clear, I believe this is a before shot. That's the before, and the other one was actually the after.
So this would be right post-storm, right after the storm, and then the accretion from the sand buildup from, the dredging itself.
Oh, it looked so clean. It looked like it was actually before the dredging, before any of the storms or anything.
Yeah, no, this was right after.
Okay. Great. Something that occurs to me is that, between contracts, we end up having to pull, and this is probably a better question for Brian Adair, but we end up having the contractor pull all their pipeline out, which takes time and money. And then the next contractor ends up putting it back in. And sometimes it can actually be the same contractor. I'm wondering if it wouldn't be more prudent just to actually, for the harbor or the city to own a section of pipeline that just stays underneath the sand in that big long stretch down East Beach. and then have the contractor bid on just hooking up to it rather than having to bid on remobbing all that pipe?
Yes, Commissioner McCray, both Director Wiltshire and I have discussed that, purchasing pipe. This pipe does belong to Pacific Dredge, so like you mentioned, they do pull that pipe at the end of their 3-year contract. They don't leave it there for us thinking they're going to get the bid. But yeah, it was kind of discussed with us whether or not we could look into purchasing the pipe, keeping it buried, and then whichever company comes in, whatever types of couplers or fittings that would need to be changed could be done to accommodate that. But yeah, that was discussed.
Yeah, and Commissioner Gray, just to add to that, it frustrates me to no end as well. But it's an Army Corps project, and so we've asked that to the Army Corps, and their preference is to do it this way. And so they sort of dictate the terms of the contract, and their preference is that different contractors use different pipes, different couplings for whatever reason. They deem this the most efficient way for them to manage the project, but I can assure you we're going to continue to keep advocating for it, because it just seems like such a waste of time and money and energy, but I couldn't agree more. And so, but our role is advocating for that, but we aren't the ones who can make the decisions to ultimately do that.
Thank you for that, super helpful.
Commissioner Hanrahan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Engebretson, for an excellent job in getting the harbor dredged in proper time. I wanted to offer the commission notes from stakeholder Jamie Diamond from Santa Barbara Landing. She and I communicated via email about this issue. She was very upset when her vessels were unable to be getting out of the harbor over the period when we were unable to get dredging, and she says it's important that we reassess our plan when the 3-year contract ends and negotiations begin. She says that seems to be where the ball is dropped, since it ends with the spring dredge and it leaves us vulnerable until an agreement can be made. And that seems to be what's left us with a little bit hung out to dry in the fall. Is there a way, she's asked, is there a way that we can better bridge that time period? Can we consider a third funding cycle for dredging? With the new storm surge becoming the new normal, maybe we should be more proactive to prepare by adding a third dredge session. So not asking for any action from the commission tonight, just bringing forth a stakeholder perspective.
Very well. And speaking of that, do we have any public comment?
I have one speaker slip, Chris Voss.
Good evening, Chair Stedman and Commissioners. Chris Voss, Commercial Fisherman of Santa Barbara. We've written a letter that we hope captures the facts around our experience when the actual dredging process began and ended. And we had some concerns about communication challenges as to our notification right before the dredging started, and there were estimates of when it was going to end that didn't quite line up with reality. So the dredging got finished on Saturday morning, quicker than anticipated. We thought it was going to be Sunday. And it started 24 hours after we were notified. And so there were fishermen that were on the grounds that they were concerned about whether or not they had to go to a different port. And so there was a lot of uncertainty around the details associated with an emergency dredging process. We are not blaming the Harbor District for the swell event. Obviously, that was a natural occurrence. We all had to deal with the challenges that brought about. We're a community that knows how to adapt to adverse conditions and situations. We just would in the future potentially suggest or lightly encourage maybe a little better communication around the details if something like this were happened before. We have a history of having navigated around the dredge in the past because the dredging process is constant, you know, and so there was some notion that some of the past behavior of the fishing fleet and the recreational fleet in navigating around the dredge could be applied to this situation. But we understand that it was an emergency dredging process that now has only scored a very small channel through the mouth of the harbor that will be widened shortly with another dredge and then another dredging process again, I guess, in the fall. So it looks like we're in really good shape for next winter moving forward. So that's all good. But we felt frustrated with just the details around the information exchange when they closed the harbor mouth in a hard close, and then the opening was a little sooner than anticipated, which led to kind of guys going, shoosh, if I had known that, I could have planned around that. So I just wanted to communicate that, and we'll have a letter to you that describes it. Our goal is not to place blame, it's just to encourage potential better communication in the future. And it tries to capture all the businesses that depend on an open harbor mouth. It isn't just commercial fishermen. You know, as you can imagine, the kelp cutter for the abalone farm, and then Jamie Dimon Sea Landings operations were impacted. So there were a number of other commercial operations that were disrupted and then, damaged.
Before you go, I have a question.
Go ahead.
As a harbor pro and mariner, what do you think our chances are of making it through this winter till the spring dredging without the entrance reclosing? I
Okay.
understand it's pretty skinny even as it is.
Right. I have serious concern, given that it seems as though the low pressures are still coming pretty, we see that there's in forecast chance of rain, even though it was eliminated this week. I'm tracking it carefully because if another large-scale event drops a little further south and we get another westerly swell, we just had a 22-foot swell 2 days ago at Harvest Buoy. If that low pressure had dropped a little lower, we could have had another swell event that, granted, there's very little sand on the beaches to migrate into the harbor mouth, but there would be enough, I believe, to close it again in short order before our rainy season's over. So we're I believe, in a very vulnerable position as we sit right now.
Thank you.
Any other public comment, Angela?
I don't see any hands raised on Zoom, and I have no additional speaker slips.
Okay, and you're complete, Eric?
Yeah, I'm complete. As mentioned in the report, the dredging is going to start, well, they've started mobilizing today. They should begin actually pumping sand by Monday. That's a 24-hour operation. It'll be 15 days for that cycle. 120,000 cubic yards should be removed in that 15 days. So we look like we're set pretty well. And just in regards to emergency dredging versus our maintenance dredging, when we're doing the maintenance dredging, we can work on one side or the other and allow boats to go through. During the emergency dredging, there was wire, rope, anchors holding the dredge in place, and we really didn't want anybody running into any of that gear, not only to delay dredging, but liability for also the boat owner interrupting the emergency dredging as well. That's all I have.
Okay, very well. So now we'll go to facilities, right? Okay.
Sorry, can I ask one question here?
Oh, yes,
If the,
Commissioner Anderson.
If the pier wasn't there, would the sand still stop everyone from getting out of the, does the sand go underneath the pier too? It couldn't do like drawbridge pier or something? Just, obviously I know
Yeah.
it's expensive and all, I'm just curious, like, does the sand also go underneath the pier and like completely barricade it, or is it just at the mouth?
Yeah, so the littoral drift, the current, it kind of wraps around what's called the sand spit, and then from there, that sand moves along the shoreline. It doesn't really move offshore. There's been sand that's been deposited, I believe in 20 feet. Perhaps Commissioner McCray would know the exact, but there's still a big mound of sand just east of the wharf that really hasn't moved. And this was, I think, done back in the 60s. But yeah, that current runs right along the shore, and so, no.
It's all
Quick
block.
answer, yep.
So honestly, my experience is that once you get east of the red buoys, you're on your own. So there's no navigable water east of those red buoys.
Thank you.
Hello, Chairman Stedman and Commissioners. My name is Brian Adair, Facilities Manager at the Waterfront. I'm here to present a Facilities Management Report. Again, we're talking about the winter storm. The Waterfront experienced heavy storm surges with king tides for 5 days from approximately January 5th through the 9th. We had heavy erosion and debris on all beaches. We also had some waterfront property damage. These are pictures. It kind of helps us understand how much sand was swept away from all of our beaches. So on the before, that's Ledbetter Beach in front of the commercial area. And then the afterwards is the sand was moved down coastline about 5, 6 feet. It was just a tremendous amount of sand that moved down coastline. These are pictures of some beach erosion and beach debris. The one on the left is Ledbetter Beach, and the one on the right is East Beach. Some more pictures of the beach erosion, as well as the heavy debris that was pushed up on the beaches. Estimated storm expenditures. There's 5 categories. Emergency protection measures, 1.5 million. That's mostly the revetment. Debris removal and disposal, 0.3 million. Auxiliary harbor dredging, 0.3 million. Asset repairs, 0.5 million. So just a round rough guess is about $2.6 million worth of damages and cleanup. Storm response funding sources that we're looking at is, of course, our waterfront reserves. We're applying for FEMA public assistance through the city, through the county. We've had FEMA inspectors here. We're also trying to submit property insurance claim through risk management. We've had the insurance adjusters here twice, looking at all the city infrastructure and buildings, but down at the waterfront, they've come by twice and trying to get them to understand what we're doing. This slide is about just specific repairs, parking lot asphalt repairs, $120,000, Marina One infrastructure repairs, $65,000. That's for replacing a broken dock and one pile, and tenant fence line repairs along the southwest corner of the commercial area. Stearns Wharf pile repairs. We lost about 10 piles under the Stearns Wharf. They were not included in our annual heavy timber project for Stearns Wharf. Marina dock repairs, $20,000. On the second line item, I want to correct myself. It's a Marina One infrastructure repairs. We had some water pipes, communication conduit damaged. And speaking of that, the photo on the left is on the east side of the yacht club. They have a rock rebutment wall before their courtyard. As you can see, the big boulders were sloughed and moved and shifted from all the pounding of the waves and erosion of the sand. And that, as you can see, one of the water pipes there being pushed really hard by that big boulder. The picture on the right was Tierra Construction helping us relocate our domestic water supply and our fire hydrant supply to Marina One. And then also they helped us install new 4-inch conduit for communications, fiber optics, and coax cable. There was also a gas line that was exposed from this erosion, so we relocated that gas line so it'd be better protected. We built a rock revetment, and this red line shows you the direction and length of this revetment. It starts after the existing revetment in the yacht club parking lot. It really showed us that this rock revetment really does a great job of protecting our assets. And the sand is nice, but in a real big storm like this, the sand gets washed away and we're very vulnerable. So luckily with Mike's support, we were able to build this revetment. This rock revetment is about 365 linear feet. This diagram on the right shows the type of structure that we built. And this diagram came from Moffett and Nickel did a survey for us on how we could better protect Ledbetter infrastructure. And this is one of the options that they engineered, recommended back in the year 2000. So it has a line of filter fabric, and on top of that, it's 15 feet tall, 8 feet wide, and we imported 6,000 tons of rock from Cambria. The construction, we had to get, we got 2 permits to construct this revetment. The California Coastal Commission gave us a temporary permit for 1 year. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers gave us a permanent permit, but we have to go back and explain to them what we did, and also we have to talk about mitigation measures. Sorry, I forgot that word. And then the third permit that we applied for, but we haven't got a response back, was from the Regional Quality Control Board. The contractor who built the revetment for us was James C. Cushman at a cost of $984,000 based on a time and material. And they did a really, really good job fighting the low tide and prepping the area and moving sand and working in a really tight spot. They built the revetment in sections. So they really concentrated and moved really quick. And even though they were on T&M, time and material, they really worked efficiently and looked out for our best interest. And they did a really good job. The civil engineer is DCME Incorporated. It was important for us to have a civil engineer on hand to document what was going on, also verify the labor sheets that Cushman was submitting to us every day. Also, a civil engineer will help us get the as-built documents so that we can go back and hopefully get a permanent permit with California Coastal Commission. The project was more or less approved on January 9th, and they completed on January 27th. These photos are shortly after the major storm erosion. That's on again, the southwest corner of the yacht club parking lot, and further west behind Harbor Marine Works, and further west behind the maintenance yard. And the picture on the right is the revetment wall that Cushman had built for us. Follow-up, we have to apply for FEMA reimbursement funds. We have to explain to the U.S. Corps of Engineers what we actually constructed, apply for permanent regulatory permits, which I mentioned with CCC, and AQ, Regional Water Quality Control Board. We also have to do a CEQA to share with the community what we did, and and look for environmental impacts, public assessment requirements, and again, the environmental mitigation. Any questions on the storm and rock revetment?
Commissioner Nelson?
You showed on one of your slides, like three categories. One was the department's reserve, the other was FEMA, and the other one was insurance lines. Have you kind of come up with a percentage of what you'll think you'll get from all of those? Are we going to have to likely bear 60% of the cost, FEMA 20? Have you got any preliminary idea of what we may qualify in terms of recovering the $2.6 million? And then secondly, is there any coordination, or is everybody on their own? The airport's doing their assessment, Public Works is doing their assessment, transportation, and everybody is scrambling to get, or is there some coordination of the cities trying to recover the funding?
Yeah, great question, Commissioner Nelson. I'll answer your second question first. Yeah, we're coordinating with the city, all departments, and so we're working through our emergency operations manager, who's consolidating that FEMA reimbursement process. So each department is feeding our loss estimates and invoices. All of our tracking is going through the city as a hub. As far as how much we'll get reimbursed, we don't know. We're saying it's initially likely that we'll receive some high level of reimbursement based on the fact that it was a state declared emergency, a county declared emergency, a city declared emergency. So, but there's always some variability there. Sorry, I don't have a better answer on the exact amount. Yeah.
Is the reserve really taking hard?
The reserve has currently taken it hard, and so that's where we're funding all of the major contract invoices right now. So we've already paid Cushman, who completed that work, roughly $1 million. That's coming directly out of our reserves. And so we'll see that when we get to our budgeting process in the next couple months. If we don't have answers from FEMA on how much we'll get reimbursed, we're going to kind of show those scenarios of where our reserves are at with and without reimbursement. And so we'll kind of have a good picture of at least the two scenarios.
Commissioner McCray?
Yeah, Brian, I had a couple of questions. I look at, in the materials packet that we received, actually was posted publicly online, it shows estimates for costs, and I noticed that the beach cleanup was estimated at $60,000 and the harbor debris cleanup was about $50,000. But yet in your slide, it shows almost $300,000 as a total cost. And I was wondering what the harbor debris cleanup actually ended up costing us.
What was 300,000 that you saw?
On your slide, it showed that the debris cleanup, 0.3 million.
Just thinking off the top of my head, cleaning up the harbor was, inside the harbor, all the debris, it was about 45,000. I haven't seen the invoice yet for that. I am still waiting for Parks and Recreations to let me know what that costs them. They did a lot of the heavy lifting to clear the debris off all the beaches. I'm still waiting for them on that number.
Thank you. And then I have a follow-up. I know that in Mission Creek, typically harbor staff builds a kind of a sand berm that directs the outflow and a lot of the branches and stuff that come down through the stream. Kind of down towards the east, it prevents that stuff from getting underneath the wharf and potentially, bouncing off the piles, which is not a good thing, and also getting into the harbor. And I was wondering if that got accomplished this year.
Yes, about a week ago, we did some sand berm maintenance on the East Beach sand berm. It was pretty well, about 200 feet was eroded away that we were able to construct last fall. But so we had someone service that and rebuild it back up to protect Stearns Wharf.
Great, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Commissioner Cohen?
I was just going to say that if there, I think I've mentioned this before, but if there is advocacy that is needed in this reimbursement process or in this process that, you know, I personally would do, you know, like to lend my support or help, or if there's someone we need to talk to as commissioners. So I just will, again, offer that. If there's anything that we can do to help to make sure that our reserves get replenished, then please, by all means, let us know.
Commissioner Hanrahan.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Adair, quick question on the rock revetment. Was that, given the emergency situation, was that contract put out for bid?
No, under our city policy, when there's an emergency, we can issue emergency PO. And so that we didn't have that requirement at the time.
Great. That probably got that revetment built much quicker by Mr. Cushman. James Cushman was the contractor. So at $984,000, I think was the number, just under $1 million for that. Do we have a sense, is that more than we might have paid if it wasn't an emergency situation? Is that something, I'm just trying to get a sense, like, were we overcharged for the immediacy of creating that rock revetment?
My personal opinion is no, we weren't not. From the study, it's called a beach study from the year 2000. I think I saw a number back in 2000, it was 1.3 million or more. So I think if we actually went out to bid, I think we would have a lot of interested people to assist us, but that number would have been driven up. I think Cushman really did their absolutely best to keep that cost down. And most of that cost is material. It was like, I'm going to guess $800,000 worth of material.
Wow.
So when you got there, he rented all the equipment and working overtime, and so I think it's very fair what he had charged us.
Sure. Thank you for your expert perspective on it. It just seemed like an awful lot of money, but you know, at the same time, to your point, he was on it. He had his people working overtime. A lot of big rocks had to come in and get placed into that spot. Just trying to get my head around the impact on our budget for this emergency situation. So trying to get a sense of what we can do moving forward to protect ourselves from having to be in these emergency situations again. Difficult something to predict a storm like this. But anyway, thanks very much for your information.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Vice Chair?
Yes, I just commenting on the regard that we had, I know a lot of expenditures for the budget in the next fiscal year, expenditures that actually exceeded the expected revenues. And I'm wondering if, due to all of these storm costs, we've had to revise the budget or stop projects moving forward because of these unexpected $2 million that had to come.
Commissioner Stanwyck, good question. The short answer is no. We're using these reserves kind of for essentially what reserves are for, and so it's an emergency situation. The out years, our reserves will be impacted, and so essentially if we don't get reimbursement, we could be in a situation where in our 2024 and 25 budget cycle, our reserves will be driven below policy level. We still have funding in reserves, but this event, if we have to kind of fund it ourselves, would put us in a situation where we'll likely be below policy. And so that doesn't mean we're out of reserve funds, but it would be below kind of the threshold that council has set for us to kind of stay above.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Doesn't look like there are any more questions, Brian.
Thank you. Commissioner Merritt, on the debris removal and disposal, I think that number is wrong. That's 300,000. I think it should be like 140,000. So I'll update my PowerPoint.
Great. I'll be interested to see what it actually does come out to be when you finally get the invoices in.
Okay.
All set, Merritt? Or-
When we get to deliberations and stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we've received all the reports, right? Yeah, so we're good.
So I do have I do have something I'd like to point out. The storm did, and Angela, if you could pull up my photo, or Caesar, or whomever. So the storm did some additional things. Some of it has built up over time, but there's actually sand that pushed through the breakwater. It has, there's spaces between those rocks are carefully placed, but there are channels through them. And when the sand from the front of it gets pulled back or pushed down the beach, then water whooshes through our breakwater underneath it. There's a wave reflector atop it, but it whooshes through and carries sand into the harbor. So it's actually built out quite a bit. And one of our tenants has a big sailboat there. He said that gap there is so skinny he has to pass within 2 or 3 feet of the anti-vessel to get out. And he actually can't turn the vessel to get out. He has to back out at this point. So I was wondering, I understand we do clam shelling to pull it out, when that might be scheduled, and once again, how are we going to pay for it?
Hi, Commissioner. Yes, I had to try to answer that for you. So yeah, it's a big concern, and we've been watching how the sand infiltrates through the breakwater. And after the storm, majority of the sand on the south side of the breakwater had dissipated, and I got a good look at what's going on there. And I've spoken to some contractors on how we can inject epoxy material into the inside in the cavities of the breakwater to prevent this sand from infiltrating across. That is very expensive. So I'm going to try to approach it in a two-phase. One is to dredge the sand away from the breakwater and get a better understanding where it's coming through. The next time there's a storm on the south side, I'm going to plug the big cavities and then focus on injecting and filling those smaller voids. But if we try to inject now, it just might come out. But hopefully maybe enough sand could be on the south side that would contain that. So we're trying to evaluate what's the best approach and when to do it.
I was actually more concerned with just getting the sand that's there. That I just thought of it as kind of an ongoing, just another harbor task. And so that was like dredging, but this one falls to us. Yeah, it's about when and how much money and where is it coming from.
Yes, sir. Also, there's permitting. Regulatory compliance is a huge hurdle to get over. Then there's a cost, and then there's the actually doing the work and reporting what you did back to the regulatory agencies. So right now we're in the middle, or wrapping up renewing our sediment management plan with California Coastal Commission, and that's one of our biggest hurdles. And they have a lot of requirements, and we've about completed meeting those requirements. But as soon as we get that permit up here, just some timeframes that we did a bathymetric harbor survey back in April to get a baseline of where we are, where is the sand sitting, and then I'll have another bathymetric survey in this month. Also, it was planned for March, but because the dredge is happening, we're going to use the survey vessel to survey our inner harbor again, and we can compare that, what it looked like last year, what it looked like this year, how things are changing. So we're trying to create a long-term plan and understanding what we're dealing with and how to deal with it. So again, we are in the process of the coastal development permit. It's called a sediment management plan. We have a plan, notice of intent to issue the permit from CCC, but they've required us to do some conditions before approving that permit, such as installing new rake signs, grunion monitoring and avoidance plan, public assessment program, biological assessment, and then there's a sediment analysis plan that has to be reviewed by a committee that's a conglomerate of the different agencies, CCC, EPA, Fish and Wildlife, Water Quality Control Board, and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Corps of Engineers. Last week, we pulled core samples, and it's being run through a lab. Once that lab report gets finalized, we'll update our SAP, our Sediment Analysis Plan, and then go back to this DMMT committee, regulatory committee, with all these different bodies, so they all can see what we're proposing and comment and approve our sediment management plan. Once that gets approved, then we can start looking at dredging on the inner harbor. So just this slide basically shares with you there's different regulatory agencies that we have to comply with, and we're doing so currently. This map of the harbor depicts where we're proposing to do dredging. This is part of the sediment analysis plan. And without a pointer, I'll start with the Stearns Wharf. Over by the harbor restaurant, Harbor Patrol is concerned that they can't access and get close enough to the underside and the top side of the Stearns Wharf at that location. So that's one area of priority for dredging. And with the storm coming in, it moved a lot of sand from the... Okay, got it. So I do have a pointer after all. So over here is one area we're prioritizing to dredge, but we have a lot of sand coming off the sand point and moving this direction. So once we do our new bathymetrics, we'll get a better understanding how much this area has been impacted and make some decisions. The next point is over here by the boat ramp. We've taken 2 sediment samples here, but reason you take sediment sample plans, we call them core samples, is that once you take something from someplace, where are you going to put it? Oh, we're going to put it over here on East Beach. So we have to make sure that that material is compatible with this material over here for grain size and for chemical content. So we're going to take core samples here because we'd like to dredge here sooner than later. Then over here on Marina 2, it's because there's a storm drain that comes in this way. It's over time, it's slowly, the sediment is filling in. So we took core samples here. Over here on the South Fish Float, where the large commercial fishing boats are, that's filling up slowly. But it's a concern for us, and we want to make sure the fishermen can park their vessels without any damage and do their thing. Then the next thing is along the breakwater, which you brought to my attention that we have concerns about. So those are the areas that we're focusing on a 2 to 3 year dredge cycle, because we don't have the funding to do everything at one time at this juncture, and nothing's a real priority except for over here as far as health and safety. And then so we want the commercial fishing boats, the charter boats, to get out safely too. And then when we have really big yachts that come in that park here at the visitor berth, big berth they call it, we want to make sure they have a good turning radius to get in and out around this corner. And then over here is a priority because the channel is getting narrow. Any questions on this slide before I move to the next?
Thank you very much. That's super helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So this is a bathymetric that we did last April to establish a baseline. And again, you can see over here, Marina 2 has got a problem. Along the breakwater, the sand is infiltrating through the side, but it drops off quickly, but it is narrowing the channel. And over here at the east side of Marina 1, we want to widen that up. That's outside the Federal Channel. Then over here at the boat ramp, you can see that we got some red area that we want to address. And if you need to see the numbers, here are actually depths of around the marina that makes up that color bathymetric survey. To also help answer your question, over here, this diagram is not to scale. It's just for a quick reference on the width of that we have of the interior channels. And the sand spit that's growing the most is this one over time, and this one's narrowing down. The entrance to the harbor, we try to follow the state marina berthing facilities guidelines by the state, and they're just kind of like guidelines. They're not requirements, but they're guidelines, and our admin staff have been talking about what are our standards and what are our guidelines, and so we're trying to hone in on that. But this inner channelway here, ideally you want 75 feet. So right at this point, if I can read that correctly, it's 55 feet and decreasing. But from this point down, the slips, these are berth slips, slips that are for 25-foot. They're slips for 25-foot long boats. So they're not really big boats as you get down this end, and you got the sailing center and smaller boats. And this is not ideal, but it's not critical at this point, but we do want to address that. And we're hoping to contract with the sandpiper to dredge at the Stearns Wharf at the east side of Marina One, and if they can reach into the boat ramp channelway. And then on this side, this spring, we are going to be renting some equipment, and our maintenance staff is going to again partner up with other event contractors, and we're going to try to dredge this out ourselves. We'll dredge up and over the breakwater and just displace the sand over here. So over here, it's about 75 feet. So we're okay here, and as far as our standards goes, we're okay here. But again, we want to chew away at this, but our priority is to hit this, and then maybe hit this area because there's that long sailboat. I think that's in the Elfinger. Any questions on that topic?
I have a question on a completely different topic, so it's still in your wheelhouse though, but I'd like to let the other commissioners ask anything that they might have on siltation.
Commissioner Hanrahan?
Thank you, Chair. I have a quick question for Mr. Adair. What's the current status of the breakwater, and how do we keep an understanding of the condition of that important structure?
After the storm again, I went and surveyed it twice and really got an understanding how it was built and what's it built on, and is there any cracks? Is it shifting? Is it moving? It looks really, really, I'm really impressed that it's held up to this amount of abuse. But on the couple years ago, I'm not sure how many years ago, they redid the top cap. They redid it, and there are some expansion joints that are expanding just a little bit. The surface that you walk on is cracking, and if that salt water gets down into the rebar, it's going to sprawl and cause more cracking. So I'm going to try to figure a way to seal those cracks and extend the longevity of our investment. But for the most part, it's really doing very well. But we can try to stay on top of it by the other things I mentioned earlier.
Great, thank you. Good to know.
Did you want to ask another question, Commissioner McCray?
Yeah, we haven't heard about that our ice house in a long time, and I'm always concerned. So I was wondering if you had any updates on how it's hanging in there, and hopefully you're going to tell us it's going to keep on making ice for a good long time.
I don't have a crystal ball, but looking at our track record for the last year and a half, we're doing very well. The fishermen may have other comments because they're the ones who buy the ice from us, and they see it dispensed, and is it available at the right times? Is the fuel dock open to sell them the ice? There's some other operational questions that we could help them with possibly, but just from this year, these are the items that have been completed. So as you recall, we try to create a large capital improvement project, and the estimate for that was like at $1.7 million. And if we went out to bid, maybe that would be true or not true. But so we retooled ourselves, and we're piecemealing it. So we're going to save a ton of money by piecemealing it. And I think our investment will pay off in the long run. So these are the repairs that have been completed. And these are the repairs I'm still coordinating with contractors, getting bids and scheduling them. But I've ordered material. But these are the things we're eyeing or hope to do next. If you want me to describe any of those action items, I'll be glad to do so.
Thank you very much. That's quite reassuring.
Thank you.
Very well. Great responses, Brian. I guess we'll just move on to commission and staff communications. Staff?
Nothing on our end that we haven't communicated, Chair Stedman.
Okay. Commissioner Nelson?
Caesar, I have a question for you. Believe it or not, I was reading the Santa Barbara
Microphone.
City College.
Microphone.
Santa Barbara City College's long-range development plan. And in the parking and transportation section of that plan, there's reference to a program that the Waterfront Department has with City College since 2000 of making 300 parking spaces available to students during weekdays. Is that still ongoing?
Chair Stedman, Commissioner Nelson, yes, that's part of our joint use agreement. And it's been standing for many years, actually, since late 60s, and then it was revised in the 90s.
But do they use 300 or?
No, their parking permits have access to our parking lots, which is only Ledbetter and Harbor West.
Okay.
But as of lately, since the pandemic, they continue. They pay us. There's a formula that they pay us for each semester, and but since the pandemic, their class sizes they were highly reduced. So they really, it's been very low impact. What you used to see prior to the pandemic hasn't really come back, and it appears that it will not, based on what I've heard from City College management. They're really focusing on online classes, but again, it's really soon post-pandemic, so it could come back.
Right.
But yeah, it is an agreement that we've had with them as part of our joint use agreement.
That's great, thank you.
And also to add to that, Commissioner, in the summer times, our parking permits are valid in their two lower parking lots adjacent to the stadium.
Okay.
So, which is, it's not widely known by the public, but we advertise it and we have signs, so we put in the summer for overflow parking and so forth.
Yeah, just curious.
Okay. I don't see any other hands raised by the commissioners. Okay. I guess we can move on to a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn tonight's Harbor Commission meeting.
Yes. And we have a second.
We have a second.
Okay. Angela, do you want to roll call us out of here?
Commissioner Nelson?
Aye.
Commissioner Stanwyck?
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson?
Yes.
Commissioner Cohen?
Yes.
Commissioner Hanrahan?
Yes.
Commissioner McCray?
Yes.
Chair Stedman?
Yes.
All right, meeting's adjourned.